there is an increase in malicious activity witnessed by RegTech firms. So according to our study, 27% of participants reported their financial firms using their technology had detected 9.1 more instances of nefarious activity over the period compared to the same time last year. And this is no surprise, as I know regulators have warned financial institutions to be particularly watchful in relation to their IT networks, and also just to be aware of, new money laundering risks. And then also just a quick thing that we found from our survey is that 54% of respondents said they have the same level of confidence, whereas 31% said that they were less confident about the health of these industries. And this is probably a result of those risks associated with the pandemic. So panelists, final questions for you around the health of financial organizations specifically. This is a question for you, Robert. How do you think organizations can improve the culture for incident reporting? Oh, Robert, I think you're on mute.
The biggest phrase in 2021. Sorry, so yes, I totally agree with that. And qualitatively, I've heard from multiple vendors who look at incident response that they already dealt with more in the first half of this year than did the whole of last year. So I think the cultural change actually, I think, is very much helped by cloud adoption. Things like cloud systems for policy management of any area, of training, of awareness, of recording, of being able to get insights and good reporting anytime, anywhere. All of that collaboration that cloud-based tech enables much more than any other is going to help drive the culture. But I think that there's a real transparency and visibility issue as well, because there was a study that showed that the confidence in the compliance levels by the senior management, the very senior management, sort of board level C-suite, was not reflected in the confidence of the compliance by the people doing the job a couple of levels down. And there was a recent KPMG study that asked 250 director level people in 1,000+ employee companies in the US just this year. And they said actually 29% said their company sometimes employed unethical data collection methods, and 33% said consumers should be concerned how their personal data is being used. So this was across organizations, but I think it does show that there's a long way to go on culture and awareness. But I do think that this is being driven from the ground up very happily, like we talked about before, about people taking things off their own bat and knowing that they're working at home or working remotely from a cafe or what have you. They've got to be very careful about security and compliance. And I think that this mismatch between what the potentially from the top down look is and the bottom up look is, I think there's a good groundswell of awareness now coming from the bottom up, and it will drive more adoption of the cloud-based services to help with that. So I think that it's all coming together quite nicely. I'm very positive on
it. And now I was on mute. Great. So moving on to our second question around how do we make sure conduct is followed? I don't know, Jay, if you want to answer that, or anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is quite an important part in compliance, and it has become a lot more important in the last few years. We have seen an influx of AML KYC solutions, then trade reporting, transaction monitoring solutions. Suddenly regulators are looking into conduct and how do we make sure that we're not trying to prevent bad behavior, which is what was said before, but actually we encourage good behavior, and how do you actually communicate what people are expected to do, which is compliant with regulations. In fact, it's very, very difficult, purely because a lot of organizations don't have the full understanding of all of the obligations which are applicable to them, and then also don't have a way to communicate those obligations to employees in a central way. And we have seen huge wave of adoption just of the technology of communicating policies and procedures to employees, mapping those policies and procedures to the regulatory obligations. So you can actually have that traceability. Okay, here's our obligation, here is how we're implementing it within the organization, here is how we communicate it, and then we track engagement with that content. And we have seen, for example, last year, Department of Justice in the US issued the guidance on compliance systems, which talks about, the having the ability of, or actually mandating organizations to monitor engagement with compliance content, to make that compliance content dynamic. So it's not a compliance manual sitting on the shelf and it's just, dust is taken off, is brushed off it every time there is a regulatory question from a regulator. So I think, conduct is more about being able to dynamically communicate the what is expected, and then having the ability to track that engagement and understand how the culture of conduct is evolving within the organization.
Great. And as we wrap up this webinar, does anyone have any closing thoughts, or where do we go from here?
Yeah, I like that point, Jay, that you made. I mean, obviously you need exactly the right solutions to help knit the pieces together in terms of what the regulator says you need to do, and then how you make that happen through policies, controls, and so on. I think what the gap is, and not just in your solution or Robert's or any RegTech solution, is that marriage of technology with humans. Ultimately, is in cyber, people say, computers don't commit crime, it's people. So, with conduct, it's people. So you really need that strong cultural narrative and demonstration in an organization. But then if you've got the tool to help, make clear what needs to be done, and then tracking and evidencing the gap being closed, then that's a perfect marriage. So I think in terms of where we go from here, that's one key theme that we see to speed up adoption of RegTech.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add something further to Sarah's point, she's absolutely right. It is the humans that, commit the crimes at the end of the day. So when we're looking at RegTech type solutions, it's not the be all and end all. But what it is, you should look at it as your productivity superpower in a way, right? It's going to make you be more efficient, more cost effective, and be able to implement those rules and regulations and what have you that's needed. But also from a regulatory perspective, are seeing the regulators stepping up and giving mandates, and the FCA and the PRA have recently mandated, I think it goes into effect March 2022 next year, in terms of operational resilience, which really, I think, kind of helps organizations to put the right conduct and culture in place in terms of how they carry on forward. But it's not just tick box activity, right? It has to come from the top down and really demonstrated throughout the organization, I think, with the kind of understanding that, we want to be compliant by design going forward. So yeah, that's my 2 pence worth, or 2 cents worth, as I'm based in the States now.
I agree with Nirvana and Sarah. And actually, I'm going to hijack a bit of what Vasile said in the pre-call that we had to this when we were talking about this question. So I don't want to throw him under the bus, but I think his summary was very good at that point. But we all talked about just, there's no option. Like all the regulations are there, you've got to comply with them. The volume of data is doubling every 2 years, what have you. There's more people watched. There were more hours watched on Netflix this year than there were since the Bronze Age, or something ridiculous as a stat. There's just the sheer volume of data, the volume of connectedness, and also the, as we said, the bad actors and the ability for those bad actors to come in various different innovative ways. There's just no way for people not to look to increase security, increase that human aspect, and the focus on the benefits and the risk of the individuals, and as well as the businesses.